There's a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when you meet someone and something in your body leans forward before your mind knows why. It's not the way they look, not entirely. It's not their voice, though. Maybe it lingers in your chest a little longer than usual. It's something else, something wordless. You feel drawn to them, like gravity, like the room just shifted and only you noticed. This is the beginning of emotional attraction. And no, it doesn't shout, it whispers. It's not about butterflies or sparks flying through your veins. It's about resonance. It's about safety layered with excitement, curiosity folded into comfort. The way someone makes you feel more like yourself in their presence without even trying. You're not trying to impress them. You're not playing a role. You're just being. And they're still there with you fully. Not because you're perfect, but because something about you makes them feel real. And the deeper mystery, they make you feel real too. Most people don't know how to name this kind of connection. They confuse it with infatuation or with compatibility. But emotional attraction lives beneath the surface. It doesn't care about your favorite movies or whether you both love coffee. It cares about how you listen, how you pause before responding, how you laugh when you're safe, how your tone changes when you say, "Tell me more." It's easy to overlook, but once you've felt it, you know, there's a softness in it, a recognition. And if you listen closely, it has a language of its own. The secret is emotional attraction doesn't begin with desire, it begins with presence. You can be wildly attracted to someone and not feel emotionally safe with them. You can be emotionally safe with someone and not feel pulled toward them. But when the two meet, when safety meets depth and depth meets curiosity, something rare happens. Something that doesn't need to be rushed or labeled or figured out. It just is. So what creates this language between two people? Why do some connections feel immediately deep while others stay on the surface no matter how much time you spend together? The answer isn't just in what's said, but in how it's said. In the pauses, the glances, the body leaning in, the eyes that don't dart away when something vulnerable lands, the nervous shift in posture when someone's about to reveal something they don't usually share. The brave moment when one person doesn't interrupt, doesn't fix, doesn't analyze, just holds. That's emotional safety. And emotional safety is the soil in which attraction can take root and grow not just upward like fire, but downward like roots, steady, silent, deep. But not everyone speaks this language fluently. Some people were never taught that emotions are safe. They learn to mask, to perform, to analyze rather than feel, to seek control over connection. Not because they're cold, but because vulnerability once felt dangerous. They built walls not to keep others out, but to survive. So when they encounter someone emotionally open, soft, curious, grounded, they don't always know what to do. They may find themselves both drawn to and afraid of it, because emotional attraction doesn't offer certainty. It offers presence. It says, "I'm here, I see you, I don't need you to perform, I just want you to be honest." And honesty, real honesty, isn't always tidy. It trembles, it contradicts itself. It says, "I'm still figuring this out." And emotional attraction isn't afraid of that. In fact, it's where it thrives. Here's the paradox. The people who stir emotional attraction the most in us are often not the ones who say all the right things, but the ones who make us feel safe enough to say the wrong ones. The ones who hold space for the messy middle, the unspoken longing, the half-finished sentence, the sideways glance that says, "Did you feel that too?" In this way, emotional attraction is less about decoding and more about attuning. It's not a puzzle to solve, it's a rhythm to feel. And you can't fake rhythm. You can't manufacture resonance. You can memorize communication techniques, rehearse clever lines, perfect your posture, but you can't fake the felt sense of being emotionally available. That comes from doing the inner work, from knowing your triggers, tending to your wounds, learning how to breathe through discomfort instead of numbing it. Emotional attraction begins within. It begins with how you relate to yourself. If you dismiss your own feelings, you'll struggle to hold space for someone else's. If you reject your own vulnerability, you'll misinterpret theirs as weakness. If you see your worth as transactional, tied to what you offer, you'll expect the same from others. But if you start practicing gentle boundaries, if you listen inward with the same tenderness you long to receive, if you stop performing and start revealing, then emotional attraction will find you. Not in every person, but in the right ones. Those who are also listening. Those who are also tired of roles and ready for something real. Those who don't just want your body, your resume, your curated persona, but your energy, your mind, your emotion, your presence. And when you meet one of those people, you'll feel it. You won't need to impress them. You'll just want to be with them. Because being with them feels like being with truth. A truth that doesn't demand anything. A truth that sees you and lets you see back. That's when the language begins to unfold. One of the most misunderstood things about attraction is that it lives only in the visible, in appearance, in performance, in perfection. But emotional attraction isn't about perfection. It's about permission, the permission to feel, the permission to not know, the permission to ask, what are we doing, and not be punished for the question, the permission to cry and not be pitied, to pause and not be rushed, to speak and not be interrupted. When you speak this language with someone, it doesn't always feel romantic in the traditional sense. Sometimes it feels like a home you didn't know you missed. Sometimes it feels like remembering something you never learned. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's electric. But always it's real. And real is rare. So if you've felt this kind of pull before, this emotional resonance, don't dismiss it. Honor it. Notice who makes you feel more like yourself, not less. Notice who listens not just to your words, but to what you don't say. Notice who softens in your presence and who tenses. And most importantly, notice how you respond. Not from anxiety, but from awareness. Do you feel expanded or small? Do you feel curious or guarded? Do you feel seen or scanned? Because attraction isn't just about who they are, it's about who you become when you're with them. And that's the most powerful language of all. And what happens when two people speak this emotional language fluently, not with practiced lines or strategies, but with sincerity, presence, and awareness. There's a stillness to it, a calm excitement. Not the wild roller coaster of anxious chemistry, not the nervous buzz of performance, but something deeper, something steady. Two people existing in a shared emotional field where each moment is an invitation to unfold, not impress. In these rare moments, time seems to bend. A 5-minute conversation feels like you've known them for years. You don't rush to fill silences because the silence itself feels full. You don't over-explain your feelings because somehow they already feel heard. You're not afraid to pause mid-sentence and admit, I don't know what I'm trying to say, because you trust they won't pull away. They'll wait with you patiently, emotionally. This is not about being soulmates in the fairy tale sense. It's about resonance. You meet them where they are and they meet you back without armor. That's emotional attraction in its rawest, most human form. Not you complete me, but I see you as you are and I still want to sit closer. And yet so many people miss these moments because they're listening for declarations, not noticing the quiet shifts. They're scanning for signs of interest instead of sensing energy. They want a checklist. What does it mean if he texts back quickly? What if she mirrors my body language, but they miss the real clues, how it feels in your chest when they look at you without agenda? How your voice relaxes when you know you won't be judged? How you find yourself saying things you didn't even know you needed to say? That's the secret. Emotional attraction doesn't show up where there's pressure. It shows up where there's presence. But here's the paradox. While this language feels natural when it flows, it takes work to cultivate. It takes self-awareness. It takes emotional fluency. It takes the willingness to be misunderstood, to stay in the conversation, to clarify with gentleness instead of defensiveness. It takes owning your projections, catching yourself when you're reacting not to awe them, but to a ghost from your past. And it takes the maturity to say, that wasn't about you. That was me being afraid. Because fear is the static that disrupts the signal of emotional attraction. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being too much. Fear of intimacy, abandonment, rejection, engulfment. We bring all of it into connection, whether we mean to or not. And when that fear goes unnamed, we start looking for safety in control, analyzing texts, building personas, withholding feelings to protect ourselves. But emotional attraction doesn't thrive in performance, it thrives in presence. Which is why decoding this language isn't about learning tricks. It's about becoming someone who speaks the language of truth fluently, gently, consistently. It's about becoming someone who notices. Notices when someone lights up mid-sentence. Notices when their voice drops just slightly when they're unsure. notices how they always change the subject when the conversation gets too close. And instead of pushing through, you stay. You say, "Hey, I noticed you pulled back just now. You don't have to explain, but I want you to know I'm here. Do you feel the difference?" That isn't strategy. That's presence. It doesn't require perfection, just attention. It doesn't need smooth lines, just a sincere heart. It doesn't need certainty, just openness. And here's what's quietly revolutionary about all of this. When you start living in this way, emotionally available, self-aware, anchored in your values, you begin attracting people who are drawn to that out. Not to your image, not to your status, but to your being. You stop chasing the ones who can't meet you. You stop begging for scraps of validation. You start recognizing who wants to meet you where you are and who just likes the idea of you. And slowly your relationships shift. The conversations deepen. The connections feel safer, truer, more alive. Not because you've learned the perfect words, but because you've learned to show up. Emotionally, consistently, authentically. Now, can this kind of attraction be mutual? Every time, no. Of course not. You can speak the language of emotional presence, and some people simply won't understand it. They're not bad, they're not broken, but they're not ready. And it's not your job to teach them readiness. It's your job to keep speaking the truth, to honor your emotional life, to notice who listens and who turns away, and to know that being emotionally available does not make you weak. It makes you powerful. Not in the loud, dominating way, but in the soft, rooted way. That's soft power. The ability to remain open without collapsing, to remain sensitive without being fragile, to be kind without self-abandoning, to love without losing yourself. Emotional attraction flows most easily between people who have done this inner work, who are willing to feel what's real and not run from it. People who can say, "I'm scared," or "that mattered to me," or "I'm still figuring this out," and mean it. Because vulnerability, when shared in safety, becomes intimacy. And intimacy is the heartbeat of emotional attraction. Think of a moment when you felt emotionally connected to someone. Maybe it was a friend, a partner, maybe it didn't even last long, but for a second you felt seen, you felt met. What made that moment different? Chances are it wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a polished compliment. It was the way they paused before answering. It was the way they stayed when things got uncomfortable. It was the way you didn't feel the need to shrink. That's the secret language. And while it can't be translated perfectly into words, it can be felt again and again, in micro moments, in gentle boundaries, in patient eyes, in soft presence. So the next time you find yourself asking, "Is this person into me?" maybe pause. Maybe ask a better question. How do I feel when I'm with them? Do I feel heard? Do I feel expanded? Do I feel like I can be fully me? Because that answer will tell you far more than any decoding ever could. And if the answer is yes, if you feel seen, if your breath slows in their presence, if you stop bracing and start unfolding, then there's something here worth noticing, something that doesn't need to be rushed or proven. Emotional attraction doesn't demand an outcome. It simply asks you to stay with what's real. But that's not always easy. In a world full of distractions, performance, and posturing, staying present can feel like rebellion. We're trained to curate, to edit, to show only our polished parts. And that's the danger when we're constantly managing how we're perceived. We can't feel if we're truly met. We can't tell if someone is attracted to us, beneath, or just the version we're presenting. To decode the language of emotional attraction, we have to be willing to stop translating ourselves. Stop diluting our truth to be more likable. Stop performing calm when we're not. Stop pretending we're unbothered when we care deeply. Because every time we mute our own emotional frequency, we send out a false signal. We attract based on who we're pretending to be, not who we are. And then we wonder why we feel misunderstood, why we feel invisible in our own relationships, why something that started so connected now feels hollow. But when we begin to live in emotional alignment, when what we feel, say, and do are congruent, we send out a clear signal. And those who are tuned to that frequency will feel it. It won't always be dramatic, it won't always be mutual, but it will be real, and that is everything. One of the quiet truths about emotional attraction is that it often doesn't look like what we've been taught to want. It might not come in the flashiest packaging, it might not sweep you off your feet, it might not tick every box on your checklist. Because emotional resonance isn't always familiar, and if you've been conditioned to equate anxiety with chemistry, it might even feel boring at first. But it isn't boredom, it's nervous system peace. It's the feeling of not having to chase or convince or explain your worth. It's the freedom of being witnessed in your humanity without being edited. That's what emotional attraction feels like. Rest tendinity. Not because the connection lacks spark, but because it doesn't require you to be anything other than who you are. And when you build from that place, when attraction grows not from fantasy, but from truth, you create something sustainable, something nourishing, something that expands over time rather than eroding under the weight of performance. But it takes courage. It takes courage to sit in silence and let someone look into you without flinching. It takes courage to say, this is what I feel without a backup plan for how they'll respond. It takes courage to admit I'm drawn to you and I don't know what this is, but I'm curious instead of hiding behind coolness or sarcasm or detachment. Emotional attraction is the language of intimacy. It lives in the body, in the breath, in the presence you bring to the moment. And the more you learn to trust your internal cues, the way your body relaxes around truth, the way your spirit leans toward resonance, the more fluent you become. So if you're asking, can I really decode emotional attraction? Yes, but not with logic alone. You decode it by noticing, by listening not just with your ears, but with your heart, by staying curious even when you don't have control, by watching how your energy shifts around someone and how theirs shifts around you. And most of all, by doing the work of becoming someone who lives emotionally available, emotionally attuned, and emotionally honest. Because when you live from that place, you won't need to read the signs. You'll feel them, you'll recognize them, you'll trust them. You'll know the difference between someone who's intrigued by your appearance and someone who's moved by your presence. You'll know when the connection is real, not just performative. You'll know when someone is leaning in, not for what you can give them, but for who you are when you stop performing. That's the secret. And when you meet someone who speaks that language too, you won't need to decode a thing. You'll just breathe. And they'll breathe, and between you, something sacred will unfold. Not because you said the perfect thing, not because you read their cues flawlessly, but because you showed up as you are and stayed. Because you made space. Because you were ready not just to be wanted, but to be known. And that is what we're all really longing for. To be known, not just admired. To be met, not just entertained. To be felt, not just analyzed. That's emotional attraction. That's the language. That's the pulse. And now that you can feel it, you'll never confuse it again.